All right. Good morning, everyone. Give me 1 second to get started here and we'll begin. All right. So, welcome to the year of hybrid events. The global pandemic has fundamentally changed the nature of both in person and virtual events across the world. And as a result, conference organizers, user group managers, and event planners are having to learn how to adapt to these changing conditions in order to continue producing high quality events. So last year, many of us had to learn how to produce virtual events for the first time. And this year, many of us are learning how to produce hybrid events. And as a result, we want to share what we've learned from our first round of hybrid events in May of 2021 to help you succeed with your own hybrid virtual events. But first, a bit of background on who we are, what we do, and why we're hosting this webinar. So last month, Heather and I helped facilitate a series of hybrid workshops for AFWorks and SpaceWorks, which are the technology accelerators for both the Air Force and the US Space Force, respectively. The purpose of these workshops was to develop challenge statements to solicit solutions to common Air Force and Space Force problems from industry solutions providers. The workshops were composed of plenary sessions containing 100 plus attendees, as well as smaller breakout sessions in between, consisting of up to 10 attendees each. The work from these smaller breakout sessions was then reported out to the larger audience in the plenary room after each breakout session. Both the plenary and the breakout sessions were fully integrated, meaning both physical and virtual attendees were present and equal participants in the sessions. We used agile methods to run experiments, gather feedback, and iterate in order to continuously improve our processes and methods. And as a result of our efforts, we've received excellent feedback from both of these events, from both the physical attendees as well as the virtual attendees. So, who are we? Well, I'm Matthew Renze. I'm a data science consultant, author, and public speaker. I'm also the president of Serenze Global, which we'll discuss in a moment. And I'm also one of the co organizers of Antarctic Conf, which was the first ever technology conference in Antarctica. I'm joined today by my wife, Heather Wilde, who many of you may also know. She's the CTO of multiple companies, and she runs events for organizations like the United Nations, the WHO, the CDC, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She's also the director of our nonprofit organization, Serenze Global. And she's the other co-organizer of Antarctic which, as I mentioned, was the first ever technology conference in Antarctica. So Serenze Global is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that the two of us started a few years ago. The name is essentially a combination of Heather's first name, which is Serena, and my last name, which is Renze. It was our shipper name at tech conferences when we first started dating several years ago. Our mission is to provide access to technology education for underrepresented individuals in the IT industry. And we're doing this in order to increase diversity and inclusion in the IT workforce in preparation for the coming wave of AI automation. And we're also trying to help tech community leaders like all of you grow your local tech learning communities by creating opportunities for everyone to share their knowledge and experience with one another, which coincidentally is why we're hosting this webinar today. We're achieving our mission through a series of initiatives, including a technology education grant that we created for underrepresented individuals in the IT industry, webinars like this one that we're hosting today, Antarctic Conf, which was our conference mastermind and retreat for tech community leaders. And hopefully we're planning to create a global summit here in Las Vegas, hopefully annually, for tech community leaders to share and exchange knowledge as well. So if you're interested in any of these projects, just feel free to let us know during the Q&A and we'll talk more about them. But our purpose here today is to learn best practices for running hybrid events. We want to teach you all of the lessons that we had to learn the hard way so that hopefully your first hybrid event will be a huge success. And we also want to bring everyone together just to have an open discussion so that we can share ideas for running hybrid events. Ultimately, we just want to see everyone succeed with their first hybrid events this year so that we can all continue making the world a better place through technology education. As an overview of our presentation today, first, I'll start by telling you the 3 key takeaways from our 2 weeks of running hybrid workshops. Next, we'll discuss the various formats that we experimented with. Then we'll discuss the setups for the various rooms involved in a hybrid event. Next, we'll discuss the tools that we use to facilitate our hybrid events. Then we'll discuss the people and their roles within a hybrid event. And finally, we'll provide you with a series of tips based on everything we learned. And then we'll follow up this presentation with a Q&A session and an open discussion. So feel free to type in any questions that you have in the chat window. And Heather will gather them up so that we can go through them all during the Q&A session as quick as possible. But rather than make you wait until the end of the presentation for the most important bits, I'm actually going to start with our key takeaways. This way, if you have to drop off early or if you have something else you need to do, you can still get the most bang for your buck out of showing up here today. So the most important lessons that we learned during the course of our 2 weeks of running hybrid events can be summed up essentially in 3 key takeaways. First, producing hybrid events is essentially like producing an interactive TV show with a live audience. Think of it like this. It's a daytime talk show where the in-person audience participates and viewers can call in and ask questions on air. So consider what the production of a live TV show looks like in terms of the production team, the environment, the tools, and the culture. And as a result, you'll need to adopt similar roles and similar environments and similar tools and a similar culture as well. And we think this is important, or at least it's critical to the success of a hybrid event. If you're ever in doubt about any potential problem or solution in either the plenary session or breakout sessions, just think about how you would solve this problem if you were the producer of a TV show. This metaphor seems to be quite useful for conceptualizing what a fully integrated hybrid event looks and feels like. Second, if you require a seamless hybrid event, you will likely need to double your staff or at least rely heavily on automation. So the seams in a hybrid event are the times where the plenary session or the breakout sessions require a short delay to address the needs of one half of the audience while the other half of the audience is forced to wait. For example, if a breakout facilitator needs to shift their attention away from the physical attendees in order to resolve an issue for the virtual attendees or vice versa. On the other hand, a seamless hybrid event is one where there are no delays to address any of the needs of one half of the audience while the other half is forced to wait. So running seamless hybrid events is possible, but it comes at a high cost. Essentially, you need roughly 2 people for each role that you previously had in either a purely in-person or purely online event, or you need a lot more automation in order to reduce that labor cost. In some cases, this may be justified in order to double your labor cost or add additional automation to produce a seamless hybrid event. However, in other cases, the additional labor cost is neither possible nor justified. But what you need to do is you need to decide in advance whether your objective is to produce a seamless event or whether a few seams and cracks in the flow of your event here or there are acceptable to both your audience and your sponsors. And this decision should be made upfront for both the plenary session as well as the breakout sessions, since they have 2 different degrees of labor and automation for each. And the audience's demands for plenary sessions versus breakout sessions might be different as well. Third, fully integrated hybrid events are more challenging to run, but are also more engaging than 2-in-1 hybrid events, which we'll discuss the differences here shortly. So our goal with these hybrid events was to create an experience where both the physical attendees and the virtual attendees were treated as equal participants in both the plenary session and the breakout sessions. In addition, we wanted to maximize the face-to-face interaction between the physical and virtual attendees. This level of integration of both the physical and virtual worlds requires a significant investment of time, technology, and personnel. However, we felt that we had a commitment to both our physical and virtual attendees to provide them with the best possible experience within our budget. Ultimately, based on the feedback we received from our various experiments, the fully integrated approach to hybrid events appears to provide significantly more attendee engagement and overall satisfaction for both the physical and the virtual attendees. It's a large investment to make, but one that seems to pay a pretty high return. All right, next, I just want to briefly discuss what a hybrid event is and the various types of hybrid events that exist. And this is mostly just to make sure that we're all on the same page with our terminology, but also to clear up any potential confusion about the differences between the various types of hybrid events. Okay, first, what is a hybrid event and how is it different from a purely physical or virtual event? So a physical event, obviously, is one where the people attend the event in person. Everything takes place in a physical space like a conference center or an event space. A virtual event is an event where everyone attends the event online, and this is typically either done using webinar or video conferencing software. A hybrid event then is one where people attend both in person and online. It's essentially a blend of the physical and the virtual worlds together into a single event. There are at least 2 different flavors of hybrid events to choose from, and they go by various names. However, the 2 most common that we've seen are the 2-in-1 hybrid event and the integrated hybrid event. The 2-in-1 hybrid event is both a physical and virtual event where there's minimal overlap between the physical attendees and the virtual attendees. Both physical and virtual attendees view the plenary sessions together either in person or online respectively. However, with this format, there's minimal interaction between the physical and virtual attendees during the plenary sessions. Physical attendees join their own in-person breakout rooms and virtual attendees join their own online breakout rooms. They do not see, hear, or interact with one another across the physical and virtual space. In addition, there's no hybrid hallway track between the physical and virtual attendees, no opportunities to network and get together with one another. So the physical attendees and the virtual attendees do not network across the physical and virtual worlds at all. Unfortunately, with the 2-in-1 hybrid event, virtual attendees often become second-class citizens of the online event. They don't get the same experience, engagement, and enjoyment out of the event as the people that are physically attending. Now, an integrated hybrid event attempts to fuse the in-person and the virtual experience into a single unified event. The plenary session has both a live audience as well as a virtual audience. And the breakout sessions have both a physical and virtual attendees together in the same space, the same breakout rooms. Plus, both physical and virtual attendees engage with one another for icebreakers as well as networking events. They actually get to interact with one another outside of the sessions and the Q&A. Every attempt is essentially made to make both the physical and the virtual attendees feel as if they're equal participants in the event. Essentially, everyone is a first-class citizen. And we experimented with aspects of both the 2-in-1 hybrid event as well as the integrated hybrid event. And there were various pros and cons to each approach, which I'd be happy to discuss more in detail during the Q&A. However, to briefly summarize, essentially the 2-in-1 events offer better separation of concerns and require less technology to implement. However, there's more duplication of effort and less audience engagement, especially for the virtual attendees. Integrated events provide better attendee engagement and require less duplication of effort. However, it requires more technology and is more complex to coordinate. Ultimately, when executed properly, we feel that the integrated hybrid event provides the best experience for both the in-person and virtual attendees. Next, let's discuss the various rooms involved in a hybrid event and how to set up each room for the hybrid event. So there are three main rooms that we need to discuss in a hybrid event. There's the plenary room, where everybody assembles for keynotes and plenary sessions. The breakout rooms, where smaller groups will gather for either regular sessions or workshops. And the mission control room, where the production team regularly meets and synchronizes. The plenary room is the largest room containing the main stage, where all of the attendees gather for opening keynotes, closing keynotes, and other plenary sessions. The main stage should be set up similar to in-person conferences in terms of having large projection screens behind the main stage for the in-person audience to view during the keynotes. The main camera should be located in the back of the room, either inside or near the production AV house, where all the production equipment sits. In addition, there can also be additional cameras located in the back of the room to provide additional angles for the virtual attendees to keep the production quality high and visually interesting as well. There should also be a large projection screen showing the virtual audience next to the camera in order to encourage the presenter to make more eye contact with the virtual attendees. We wish we could have gotten the camera, the TV, like right behind the camera, but unfortunately we had to put it slightly off to the side just due to limited hardware. There should also be cameras located in the front of the room pointed at the audience. This provides a more engaging vantage point for the virtual attendees during the large group conversations and the Q&A sessions. These audience cameras should be located on tripods either at or near eye level of a person standing on the main floor, rather than using like ceiling mounted cameras like we had tried the first time. It provides more of a psychological engagement for the virtual attendees rather than having that God's eye view. It just doesn't seem to resonate, or you don't connect psychologically the same way with the in-person attendees. And audio from the plenary presenters should be captured using a wireless lapel, a handheld, or headset microphones. And then audio from the plenary audience should be captured using ceiling mount hanging microphones or potentially boundary microphones mounted to the ceiling. The audio that the physical attendees hear needs to be mixed in real time from the presenter's microphone and the virtual attendees' mic during the Q&A session. However, the audio that the virtual attendees hear, which is different, needs to be mixed in real time from a combination of the presenter's microphone or the audience's mic during the Q&A. Now, the breakout rooms are the smaller rooms where attendees gather for small group sessions and workshops. If your breakout room has a presenter giving a talk, like most tech conferences do, then you're essentially just creating a scaled down version of the plenary room. So we won't go into the specific details for those types of breakout rooms. However, if your breakout sessions are for small interactive work group sessions like we had, or hybrid workshops where everyone's spending a whole day working together, then you need to do something totally different from the in-person equivalents. These breakout rooms should be set up in a semicircle with the in-person attendees seated around the semicircle. The television screen should be located in the front of the semicircle. And the video camera for the virtual attendees should be also located in the front of the semicircle as well, pointing towards the person presenting or facilitating the workshop. An omnidirectional conference table microphone or speaker combo should be positioned in the middle of the semicircle, potentially closer to the facilitator and further away from the television screen in order to reduce any kind of feedback coming through the system. The workshop presenter should be seated at the head of the semicircle with the camera centered on them. The in-person audience will then be spread out on the sides of the virtual audience's view. The presenter can zoom in the camera on themselves when they're presenting or announcing, beginning the facilitation, and then they zoom out for the full group discussion so that everybody is a part of those discussions and the audience is closest to the camera during those Q&A sessions and collaborative discussions. Each breakout room participant should either bring their own laptop, mobile laptop, or if you're able to provide them with low-cost commodity laptops like we were able to do, this really helps with collaborating via virtual whiteboards. And if you're doing workshop sessions, actually doing tasks or building projects. So it's recommended that these laptops have trackpads or touchscreens to make interactions with the virtual whiteboard seamless. We found that people had a much easier time engaging with virtual whiteboards and collaborating if they could just touch the screen and zoom and drag and stuff like that. The mission control room is a separate room where the physical team and the virtual team can meet, synchronize, and collaborate in real time. Both physical and the virtual team routinely meet during the breaks in between sessions in order to do quick coordination sessions. And you need to have a dedicated room for this that's located near the plenary room and preferably near the breakout rooms as well. You should not try using one of the existing breakout rooms, as we learned the hard way. There's just too much setup and tear down, and sometimes sessions go a bit late, so you can't meet for your coordination session until that room is cleared and ready to go. So have a separate room available for your mission control room. And this mission control room should be equipped with an always-on video conference connection so that the physical and the virtual crew can rapidly communicate when necessary. There shouldn't be long transition time. So always have this always-on connection to eliminate those delays when connecting and disconnecting the video conference call before and after each coordination session. It literally took us 5 minutes to set up the call each time to get everybody on. And if we just would have had an always-on connection from day one, it would have made things go much easier. All right, next, let's discuss the tools that we use to pull off our hybrid events. So there were 4 main tools that we used during our hybrid events: video conferencing software, virtual whiteboard software, instant messaging software, and a production schedule. And we'll take a look at each of these in order. So we use Zoom for the video conferencing solution for our hybrid event after evaluating various options. This included the main video stream from the plenary sessions, as well as the video conferencing for all of the breakout rooms. We use Zoom in meetings mode, which is the standard mode it works in, rather than using Zoom in web conference mode, since we wanted face-to-face interaction between the physical and virtual attendees. We also used Zoom's breakout room feature for our hybrid physical and virtual breakout rooms. Essentially, we aligned each of the physical breakout rooms with their corresponding virtual breakout rooms using a common name. So for example, breakout room 1 was the name of both the physical room, the sign on the physical room, as well as the name on the virtual breakout room in Zoom. In addition, each breakout room facilitator should rename their Zoom connection to include the name of the breakout room and their name as well. So you've got the room and you've got the connection for the facilitator. And so the facilitator is going to be joined into that room, and you want them to, the facilitator's room name to be breakout room 1 hyphen Matthew Renze or something like that. And this makes it easier for the Zoom manager to identify the breakout rooms and the facilitators by name. And this helps the attendees with that as well too. Now, if you require both physical and virtual whiteboard collaboration, then you're going to need some kind of virtual whiteboard software. We were doing very highly collaborative workshops, so we required a lot of interaction with Whiteboard. And if not, you can just ignore this slide in these notes. So we used Miro as our virtual whiteboard solution for our hybrid events. During the plenary sessions, the main presenter and the master of ceremonies used Miro whiteboards in frames instead of using traditional presentation software like PowerPoint. I typically would have preferred using PowerPoint myself, but they found this actually worked relatively well so that they could present content and they could essentially present information from the breakout sessions without having to switch back and forth between PowerPoint and our virtual whiteboard. In the breakout sessions, the physical attendees collaborated on Miro whiteboards via their Chromebooks or their personal laptops. The virtual attendees worked on Miro via their own personal computers at home or wherever they were located. The whiteboards from the breakout sessions were then shown to the entire audience during the breakout session recaps in the plenary room. And this allowed the groups to share their small group efforts with the larger audience. We use Slack for a few types of communication for our hybrid event. First, we tried having our audience use Slack to communicate with one another during the event. Unfortunately, we had relatively limited audience engagement with Slack, and we eventually switched back to using Zoom's chat feature for the second and third hybrid event. More unfortunate is that Zoom's chat feature is visually very noisy and distracting for large audiences. Second, we tried using Slack to communicate among the breakout room facilitators. However, Slack can be easily become noisy and distracting to breakout facilitators if it's not used judiciously. So it's important that you have the right communication policy and structures in place, and be sure that you're not missing important messages when you're using Slack if somebody's busy running production stuff or facilitating a breakout room. And we tried using Slack for the production crew in the plenary room as well. However, it's just too distracting and there's too great of a chance to miss something important. So we recommend definitely going with the headset walkie-talkie systems for the production team. They just need to have that kind of communication rapidly with one another without having to look at a mobile phone. And ultimately, for really important messages, we still had to send out a runner to each room to inform the facilitator and get a verbal or visual confirmation. Because if they weren't watching their Slack channel, they might miss, oh, hey, we had to move lunch a half hour extra, time. So now stay in your room for another 15 minutes or something. The production schedule is the timeline of events for the production team. It describes each activity that occurs during the event. It describes when the activity should start, when it should end, how long it should last, and who's responsible for each role during the activity. We created our production schedule in Google Sheets so that it could be shared with everyone on the production team and collaborated with in real time while we were building it. Having a solid production schedule is critical to coordinating the physical and virtual production teams. In addition, having a common production schedule aligns both the physical aspects and the virtual aspects of the event into a single common timeline. It's recommended that the production schedule be printed out for the physical production team members so that they can quickly refer to the schedule without having to pull up either a computer or a smartphone. They just want to have rapid access to it. In addition, it's recommended that the production schedule not be printed until the morning of the event so that any kind of day of changes or morning of changes to the schedule can be captured and reflected on the printed version. Any last minute changes will have to be noted in pen, or sometimes you can reprint the schedule after lunch if you've got an afternoon set of changes. And then they also have to be updated, of course, on the digital copies so that everyone has the exact same information. And please be sure to consider time zones for the start and end times for any virtual production crew members not located in your time zone. We had people facilitating these events from multiple time zones, so we had to make sure that they were aware what time zone we were referring to with any time on the production schedule. So beyond the 4 tools that we mentioned, there's also a variety of other tools available. For example, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, and WebEx. In addition, some conferences have created their own custom hybrid event platforms. For example, the DevOps team created a platform called Rocket that they're using to host their virtual or their hybrid events this year. And we can discuss some of these other options during the Q&A session as well. But next, let's discuss the various people and their roles in running a hybrid event. So the event production team is largely split into 3 teams. There's the physical team, the virtual team, and then the breakout team. Your event may need some of these roles, all of these roles, or roughly half of these roles. And this is largely dependent upon the type of event that you're running and whether you want it to be a seamless event or whether a few cracks and seams in the event is acceptable to your audience and your sponsors. However, I'll leave it up to you to decide which roles you want to implement, or if you want to split things, merge things, or go in a completely different direction. In addition, you may want to change who is managing whom from this chart in order to best align it with your event-specific needs. Ultimately, this chart is mostly the ideal way to organize a hybrid event team if people and money were not an issue based on everything we learned from doing this for 2 weeks in a row. We'll go through each of these primary roles in order from top to bottom and left to right. So the event producer oversees all aspects of the production of the event. They manage the production schedule and ensure that the event stays on schedule and that everyone is where they need to be when they need to be there. They should be located in the mission control room so that they can observe both the physical events and the virtual events simultaneously. They need to have always-on communication with both the physical event manager as well as the virtual event manager, who we'll discuss next, and the breakout room managers as well. So the physical event manager is responsible for managing all aspects of the in-person event. They ensure that the physical attendees have a productive and enjoyable experience at the in-person event. They manage all in-person tasks before, during, and after the event, and they ensure that the event space is ready to go, the attendees are fed, and the facilities are clean. This person should either be located in the mission control room if it has a direct line of sight to the plenary room. A lot of these mission control rooms have a glass window where you can see the main plenary room and stuff, but everyone can be in that room behind the glass. Or they can be located in the plenary room itself, near the back of the room, preferably by the production AV house so that they can be in rapid communication with the AV production team. The breakout room manager is responsible for managing all aspects of the breakout rooms. They ensure that both the physical and virtual attendees of the breakout sessions are having a productive and enjoyable experience in those breakout rooms. They ensure that the breakout facilitators complete all of their tasks before, during, and after the event. For example, they ensure that the breakout rooms are all ready to go at the right time, fully functional, and that the attendees are happy and have snacks and treats in their breakout rooms. This person should be located in the mission control room so that they can observe all of the breakout sessions at the same time. They can jump in and out of breakout rooms as necessary. However, they might also have to run around from room to room at the beginning of the breakout sessions just to make sure everybody has what they need to get started, to avoid any technical issues right at the beginning of a breakout session. The virtual manager is responsible for managing all aspects of the virtual event. They ensure that the virtual attendees have a productive and enjoyable experience at the online event. Now, they manage all of the online tasks before, during, and after the event. For example, they ensure that the virtual assets are ready, they communicate and entertain the virtual attendees between sessions, and they publish digital content after the event is over. This person should either be located remotely or in a separate isolated room with the venue. We had our people located remotely part of the time, and then some of the time we had somebody on site, but they were in their own room so that they weren't hearing any background noises or they could focus exclusively on their virtual tasks. And essentially this is so that they can focus on these tasks without any distractions or background noise. The physical AV director is responsible for providing the on-screen visuals during the plenary session. They direct the camera, like the video camera operators, they choose the video sources to display on the main stage screen, and they record the conference video in person. They're also responsible for providing the live sound reinforcement for the physical attendees in the plenary sessions. They mix the audio from the various microphones and the audio sources, and they provide background music between plenary sessions. In addition, they also manage and direct all the AV technicians and camera operators before, during, and after the event. Next, we have the breakout facilitators. They're responsible for facilitating the hybrid breakout sessions. They guide the attendees through their breakout exercises and encourage communication and collaboration during those sessions. So each breakout room facilitator is responsible for both their physical breakout room as well as their corresponding virtual breakout room. In addition, they manage both their physical attendees and their virtual attendees as part of those tasks. One breakout room facilitator we found can facilitate multiple breakout rooms if necessary. However, this may require having a separate breakout room technician plus additional planning and staggered introductions because you can't be starting a session at the same time. You have to have somebody doing introductions while you're starting the exercise. Then you go to the other room and introduce the exercise while they're doing their round robin introductions. So the virtual AV director is responsible for providing online audio and visuals during the plenary sessions. They run Zoom, choose which video sources to present to the online audience, and they record the video of the virtual event. They're also responsible for providing online audio for virtual attendees during the plenary session. They mix the various audio sources so that the virtual attendees can hear the presenters, the audience, and the background music. Next, we have the virtual whiteboard manager. Now, they're responsible for managing virtual whiteboard assets before, during, and after the event. And if you don't have the need for a virtual whiteboard manager, you definitely don't have a need for this role. They prepare the whiteboard templates, they clean and organize content, and then they publish the final whiteboards out for production. This person should have both technical skills as well as graphic design skills since their role is part technical and part creative. This person can also act as a real-time whiteboard scribe if they have good artistic talents. You simply just point a video camera at their physical whiteboard while they're scribing on the whiteboard, and then take a digital picture of the full whiteboard afterwards for the final production output. The hybrid event will also require several AV and IT technicians in order to perform a variety of technical functions. These technicians do the setup, they operate, and they tear down all of the AV and IT equipment before, during, and after the event. They also are critically important for diagnosing and fixing issues as they occur during the event. They're your lifesavers when something is just not working and you don't know how to fix it. But we also have breakout technicians, potentially. And these technicians support the breakout room facilitators by handling all of the technical aspects of the breakout room. And this may or may not be necessary for your event. If it's necessary, it's because the breakout facilitators can't focus their attention on both the attendee tasks as well as the technical tasks simultaneously. You can do one or the other, but you can't do both very well. Once again, this all depends on whether you need a seamless event or not. So with the roles separated, the breakout facilitator can focus exclusively on the human aspects of facilitating a breakout session, while the technician can focus exclusively on the technical aspects of the breakout session. And if you're trying to create a seamless breakout session or seamless breakout sessions, then this separation of concerns may be necessary. It's just too difficult, as I said, to do both tasks simultaneously without having to stop for one group while you're helping the other group or vice versa. However, most events can probably get by with a single breakout room facilitator without having a separate technician performing both the human and technical tasks as one person. So there's various other roles that you may need to consider for your hybrid event too, like for example, you're going to need your door greeters to welcome attendees to the event. You're going to need someone to coordinate food and snacks for the in-person attendees. And something else you may not have needed in the past is a wipe down crew. People that can help wipe down equipment after each session according to your COVID protocols. And we'll leave it up to you to decide what other roles you need for your event. However, I think this should cover the most important roles that we needed for the hybrid events that we were running. All right, and finally, I'm gonna just go quickly through some tips for how to run a successful hybrid event. So I've organized these tips into a few categories just to make them easier to navigate, and we'll go through each of them in order. First, here are a few tips for creating the right team culture. Be agile. Focus on delivering value, iterate in small increments, communicate, collaborate, and use feedback as your guide. Embrace change. Your team's going to need to be dynamic and ready to adapt to issues and changing conditions as they occur. Experiment. Run A/B tests for various options. Expect small failures. Listen to feedback. Learn from your mistakes and continuously improve. Just fix mistakes. Like, accept that mistakes are going to happen. Things are going to go wrong. Just fix them as quickly as you can before the audience notices, and then move on. Just don't make a big deal about them. And if mistakes do happen, just stay positive. No matter what happens, if you let an incident affect you negatively, your negativity will bleed over into your crew and eventually over to your audience. I've seen it happen before, not at our events, but at other events, and it doesn't look pretty. Next, here's a few tips just for effective communication at your hybrid event. I recommend preferring standard industry terms like production schedule rather than proprietary terminology like run of show or whatever your local group decides to use as the name of the production schedule that no one else in the industry knows. And this is to avoid miscommunications, especially with outside contractors who may not be familiar with your proprietary terminology. Name cameras and microphones, for example, camera one, microphone one, and such for rapid identification, communication, and switching between those pieces of hardware. Name both the physical and virtual breakout rooms consistently. For example, use breakout room 1 for both the physical and the virtual breakout room name. And be explicit about physical versus virtual qualifiers to avoid confusion. And this happened a couple times. For example, if I say, ask Steve to go to breakout room 1, that could either mean Steve should physically walk to breakout room 1 and walk into the room, or it could just mean join that room virtually. Depending upon what you need Steve to do, those are two very different outcomes. So make sure you're explicit about physical versus virtual in all of your communications. Third, here's a few tips for your COVID safety protocols. First, make sure you have protocols in place and inform the attendees and participants about it, and then repeat these during the main sessions. Post your COVID protocols at the front entrance and have a door greeter point them out as everybody's entering so that they're aware of the protocols from the moment they enter the building. And be sure to provide accommodations for example, private work areas, just in case you have somebody who's a COVID sensitive individual who decided to attend the event, but once they got there, decided they were uncomfortable with your COVID safety protocols. Just give them some kind of option so they can still hang out in a room and attend virtually, even though they're physically in the building. And prepare to wipe down all equipment between each of your plenary and breakout sessions. and socially distance your participants in both the plenary and breakout rooms as well. It's a very different floor plan when you've got people spaced out at the appropriate distance than if you can put everybody side by side like you used to be able to do in events. And fourth, here's some tips for scheduling. Use timers for breakout sessions so that the physical and virtual attendees all stay in sync. Leave small buffers of time between sessions in order to resolve the inevitable technical issues you'll have. Schedule breaks to allow remote attendees in different time zones to eat lunch or dinner at their reasonable time. So we had a break for the Eastern time zone people for lunch, Central time zone, and Pacific time zone, so that they could choose to have lunch at one of 3 different times throughout the full day event. And don't be too long. An 8-hour workshop is a lot longer for online participants than it is for in-person participants. Fifth, here are a few tips for the social aspects of your hybrid event. Limit the capacity of very highly collaborative breakout sessions to roughly 7 plus or minus 2 people. We found that somewhere between 5 and 10 people was optimal for getting really good collaboration out of people. Any more and it just got to be unwieldy. You didn't have the same degree of collaboration, and too few, and it was a bit uncomfortable as well. And we tried to shoot for a 50-50 physical and virtual participant mix. This seemed to be pretty much optimal for these breakout sessions. Also do quick intros at the beginning of every highly collaborative breakout sessions if the attendees are changing rooms between the sessions and meeting different people. That way everyone gets to know one another both in person and online. And encourage both the plenary presenters and the breakout facilitators to intentionally make more eye contact with the virtual attendees. Just have them looking at the camera more often than you'd expect. It really helps with their sense of engagement online. Have hybrid icebreakers to encourage early networking across both the physical and virtual world. Hybrid icebreakers are a bit tricky, but we can talk about that more. And provide virtual networking experiences to improve the online socialization. For example, we used a tool called Wonder that helped people collaborate online or network online. And sixth, here are a few tips for technology for your hybrid event. Prefer wired devices over wireless devices for production technologies in order to increase their reliability. Provide training for both the facilitators and the attendees for tools that they might not be familiar with, like Zoom, Slack, and especially Miro if you're doing virtual whiteboarding. Have a single event homepage on your website to make it easy with an easy to type human readable URL that contains links to all of your virtual assets. So everything like your Zoom link, your Miro whiteboard links, your Slack links, anything that the attendees need should be in one place so they can quickly click on it and type it into their URL if necessary. Have backups for everything. We're talking microphones, cameras, computers, networks, cables, etc. Things will die at the most inappropriate time, and it's difficult if you don't have a backup system. Which leads us to have 5G mobile hotspots available for your production crew in case the network becomes overwhelmed. We've seen it happen, and at least a 5G connection gives you some communication with the outside world so your virtual attendees aren't completely lost. But this is also one of the benefits of having your virtual production manager remote so that they're at least connected if the building loses its internet for some reason. Have a separate network for the production crew, which is separate from the attendee Wi-Fi network. The attendee network gets overloaded, so having a separate one for production is important. Add a help desk frame to your virtual whiteboard to direct attendees for assistance on tools if necessary. And tech checks are critical to ensure a smooth running event. So if you can do a dry run the day before the event, this is highly encouraged just to iron out any major technical issues in advance. And provide laptops for highly collaborative breakout sessions to minimize work-related distractions on personal laptops. We noticed that people that brought their own laptops to these sessions spent most of the time answering emails because they still felt they had to be at work if they had their personal laptop. But the ones on the Chromebooks had none of those distractions. And finally, here are a few miscellaneous tips that really didn't fit in anywhere else. Provide some form of entertainment or engagement for the virtual attendees to fill gaps of time while the physical attendees are walking to breakout rooms. Play background music for both the in-person and the online attendees during the breaks. Have virtual attendees use the raise hand feature to speak in the plenary sessions. And be sure to have plenary speakers repeat all questions during the Q&A sessions so that both the virtual questions get repeated to the physical audience and the physical audience questions get repeated to the virtual audience questions, since it's often difficult to hear them. And then have a physical production team member actually watching for virtually raised hands and the chat window so that they can raise their hand to notify the in-person speakers, the plenary speakers, that there's a question online, because often they don't see the little raise hand icon, especially if it's across the back of the room. So there you have it. As you can see, there's a lot of people, equipment, and skills necessary to pull off a hybrid event, which naturally leads to the question, should we outsource this to someone else? And I think there's three possible answers to this, but I'm going to skip this. And if we want to discuss this during the Q&A, we will. But I think I want to get done with the main piece of the presentation here first so that we can go on to Q&A. So let's wrap things up, move on to our Q&A, and then we'll have an open discussion. And we can talk about outsourcing at the end if you'd like. But first, I'd really like to give a big special thanks to Rocketeer, The Difference, AFWorks, and Spaceworks. They gave us the opportunity to run our first hybrid events. They gave us permission to run experiments and gather feedback, and allowed us to continuously improve our processes with each iteration. So thank you to everyone that was part of these events. Second, here are a few resources in case you'd like to learn more about any of the tools or topics that we discussed today. Feel free to take a screenshot real quick, or we can post these links in the chat window during the Q&A session if you'd like. Third, if you're interested in more knowledge sharing events like we just did here for tech community leaders, please let us know. We're really interested in creating an annual global summit for tech community leaders in Las Vegas starting next year. It'd be a combination of a conference, a mastermind, and retreat with lots of fun social activities. Pretty much the same thing we did at Antarctica last year, but without all the icebergs, the penguins, and the looming threat of COVID at the time, which hadn't happened yet. We were just hearing about it when the cruise just finished up. And finally, in summary, the three most important things you need to remember while running your first hybrid event are: think like a TV show producer. You are essentially producing a live TV show with a call-in audience. It's the best metaphor I can think of to explain what this was like. Decide if seams are acceptable in your hybrid event beforehand. If you need a seamless event, plan to double your staff or heavily automate. But if you don't need a seamless event, you can get by with a few less people. And integrate your hybrid event if you want to maximize your audience engagement. You need to ensure that both your in-person and your virtual attendees are equal participants and first-class citizens in your event. All right, so that's it for the presentation. We're going to switch over to the Q&A and open discussion. And if we decide we want to hang around and talk longer, we don't have a hard end at 9 o'clock our time, so we can go over. But feel free, I'll turn it over to Heather so she can start answering some of these questions or directing them to the audience.
Hello. So one of the first questions that popped up, I see my cameras, is from Steve. Oh, and you guys, you're able to unmute and turn on your cameras now. We were just avoiding Zoom bombing. That's one thing. That's the first tip, by the way. If ever you want to make sure that when you start things, that you turn on your security settings properly.
We had it happen like a week ago.
Yeah, I've only been Zoom bombed twice, but yeah. So Steve's asking, how do you get networking integrated between in-person and virtual attendees to get that one-on-one conversation? So we've experimented not just with our hybrid events, but like we've been like at AFWorks and through my other events that we flipped to virtual right away in February of last year. And so we've been doing a lot. And so I don't know how many of you have used wonder.me. So this is a great tool to use. It's free. They do have a paid plan, but basically like people just go into this page and then they can create like networking circles to go in, and they can have one-on-one conversations, or they can just like zoom around the page and find people to talk to. And so basically like our networking hours, like the way that we approach hybrid events is we think of it as virtual first. And like, so even if people are in person, like when it's networking hour, we have them like, okay, so remember, there's people online that want to talk to you. So like we have them go into like pods, like, okay, here's a networking pod for you to go into. And like, even if this person is over there, remember that you don't know what they're like, you can talk to them through your little networking pod. And then like, if you want to go to dinner later, that's great. But this is networking hour and there's people online too. So
So,
that's
let me ask Heather, are you saying that all the physical attendees, you'd want them to join online
yep.
rather than talk to each other there?
Yeah. Yeah. So during the networking hour specifically, we have them do that.
Okay.
And then, so we have everybody go online to do that during the set time. And then like after that, like then they can go out to dinner and stuff because they've chosen to be there in person and they're going to do that anyway.
Yeah, I wish we had a picture of what the little kiosks or the little pods looked like, because it makes a lot more sense when you physically see people doing it. You're kind of just walking up to a screen.
It's like
and you've
little
got,
cubicles.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, you're just setting up cubicles and you have to soundproof them obviously, or it gets really loud. But I mean, you can do that with like,
So like physical cubes in the space you've got.
yeah, like little egg crates or something to make it like soundproof where it gets really loud, but it takes like 2 seconds to set up. And
So does that mean that you tell attendees on their phone then, and you say we need headsets and stuff? You make sure you do that?
Yeah, and we actually provided stuff for them too, and that's where the costs go up.
Right.
But because we had to provide a lot of tech, and some of it we already had. Like we had, like from years ago, we had all these Chromebooks that Google sent us for free that have just been sitting gathering dust because why do you need Chromebooks for anything? And they were, I mean, and the UI is terrible on a Chromebook, but like we were at least able to use it for something. And
yeah, I mean, that's neat. We did an internal conference and we had, it wasn't spatial.io, but it was a similar thing. And so on a screen, you could set an area and then there were concentric circles around it. And as you moved closer to somebody, they got louder in your actual physical ears. And as you moved away, it was less loud.
Yep.
So you could move between groups fairly easily. And that was really handy. I don't know if Wonder does that same thing.
It doesn't do the sound, but you don't pop into a group unless you're near somebody. And I've used Mozilla Hubs. We used Mozilla Hubs in a UN thing that we did last week. I mean, just depending on what the client and what the needs are, there's like, if they want like a more virtual thing, then you can get a little more crazy. I try and do like the lowest level of development, like the lowest level of like, well, I mean, because I mean, these events, like I try and point out to people, like you're doing it for like 3 days most. So why are you spending so much time in developing it? Like,
and that also leads to that question about, do you want to actually own all of this hardware at the end, or do you just want to outsource it to someone who has the stuff that can bring it in for those 3 days?
Yeah. And most of the time it's like that you have rent, like, I mean, in Vegas, we have rental places, like everywhere you are that running an event, there's probably someplace you can rent this stuff, or you can partner with somebody like, most of us running events like can partner with a nonprofit or are nonprofits that you can get like off, like go to Tech for Good or something and get like cheap old like hardware like in bulk that then can come in. So that's another hint. So another thing, and yes, when I say pod, I do mean like a little tiny booth, and just be as ghetto as possible setting these up. Because like the most cost you're gonna have is the tech, but get it as cheaply as you can. and the people
and the labor.
And like for some, like if you have permanent staff, obviously lean on that, and then try and get as few outsourcers as you can, because they're going to cost way more than your staff. But don't rely on volunteers, because you can't use them too much, and you can't guess their quality.
Yeah, and one thing we should point out, when you're choosing people to bring in, it's really important. They have to be both proficient with like public speaking skills to facilitate these workshops, and technical skills. Otherwise, you have to pair a technician with a facilitator, because most people just don't know the tech well enough to do all of it and know how to work with people to encourage communication and collaboration at the same time.
Yeah, if you've got somebody that's good with facilitation and tech, then you only need one person in a room. Yeah. Otherwise, you need 2 people in a room to run like the cameras and keep the conversations going. All right, and for things like post-talk questions with speakers, like so the hallway questions, the Q&A after, and stuff like that. So this one we've done a couple of different ways. Obviously, like I said, you're not going to stop people from talking in the hallway. But then the people online miss out for that. So one of the things that we do is have dedicated times like online for like, okay, so this is the breakout person, this is the speaker, and he has dedicated time for the virtual people only. So you have them come into a green room or whatever, and then these guys get the Q&A that the people in person don't get. And then you also have to have a person like a virtual host for the people that are online waiting for like the people in person that are walking from room to room during those hallways, because there's going to be like a 5 to 10 minute break between sessions where people are walking in the hallway, and then these people online, you could lose them. Like, what are they going to do? They're just sitting there waiting. And so if you have that entertainer personality like saying like, oh, these people are talking, like, let's talk smack about these people, like blah, blah, blah. So like you have to have an MC online that keeps the energy going all day, and that's something that we didn't have the first time, and people were just kind of bored, and we from the first day to the third day we had like a 60% attrition rate. And then we did that for the next two events, and we only had like a 10% attrition rate. So
when you say that, so I'm thinking, so Matthew, you're in the Microsoft stack like I am. Like at Build or Tech Ed, they cut to the Channel 9 crew that's in a specific spot between sessions so that whoever else online has something to see. That's what you mean, right?
Yeah, and that's what they did for several of their virtual workshops before the hybrid ones. It looked like literally like a TV talk show. And I know what you're talking about looks like a scaled down TV talk show. This was like a late night like entertainment thing. It was really well done. In fact, you might want to post those links to that here later, Heather. Your AFWorks Fusion event.
Oh yeah.
That was really well done.
Yeah, when we did that, yeah. So like, I've been the MC for a couple of our events, and I'm not a great MC. I'm stuttering, and I do that a lot. And so I mean, you don't have to be you don't have to be the best speaker. You just have to be able to keep talking and have something to say. I mean, during our Space Works kickoff, like it was the Engage Space event. For 2 days, I'm sitting here in like, I actually dug out my old NASA uniform, and like I'm sitting here in my jumpsuit for 2 days.
And you wore the helmet too towards the end.
I wore the helmet
with the little star field in the background made of little cutout stars from paper.
That was during the other one.
And people loved it. They absolutely loved it.
I just want to hop in and say I had really high hopes for like Princess Leia bun.
I've done that too. Okay. But that's the thing. It's just, you just have to be silly. You just have to keep people entertained, engaged somehow.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's,
and if you can have like an overarching story, people really want to find out what happens next. So you can keep people sticking around if you're actually kind of telling a little story with the little things you're doing. Like they did this thing with Elvis, where Elvis was doing these whole little skits, and it was kind of telling a story about him a day at the office, or I can't remember what it was, but it was like you really wanted to stay just to see what happens to Elvis in the end.
Yeah, and that's So it's just coming up with a little thing to keep people engaged, and I know. I mean, it's all these little things that make your event special, but that again, it's yet another thing as an event organizer that you have to think about. and you're like, oh no, I've had to do this TFP. I've had to like find the team that's willing to stick with me. I've had to find the sponsors to pay for the budget. I've had to.
Where am I going to find an Elvis impersonator at this hour?
and you're like, oh, how am I going to get the buy-in? And how am I going to be different from like this other conference that's exactly the same way? And like, I know all of our participation is down. I know like people are tired of being in everything right now. Like you
Yeah.
can't even.
I wanted to ask about that, Heather and Matthew. I mean, if we just kind of look at the last year and go, okay, a year ago, you know, this space was packed full of, like, everybody had an idea about where it was going. You know, whether that was a virtual avatar in a virtual space or whatever it was, right? What really do you feel like we've learned in the last year? I mean, definitely we're seeing fatigue now and those things, but these things still provide value. How do people seem to want to consume it after having eaten way too much of it?
I think the most important thing we've learned is how much people value human connections, and anything that's getting between those human connections essentially decreases the value. So anything you can do to minimize those barriers between the physical interactions and the virtual world is highly beneficial, because I think people are just Zoom burnt out because they're seeing people's faces, but they're not getting that dopamine rush from really interacting and engaging and making human connections with them.
Yeah, what they like, we have a rule that no PowerPoints and no more than 8 minutes per speaker for our events. So yeah, like, I mean, and that's for like all of our major events. So I mean, and that's not for like Matthew and my conferences, but that's for the ones that we do at the difference. So like whenever. So like even when like we've got like a general from the Air Force or the Space Force coming in, like they want to talk forever, and we're in their ear cutting them off, and we're like, hey dude, you're gonna get cut off whether you want to or not. Oh, and that's another thing, like Matthew didn't mention, like we have like that mission control person is in the other person's ear, so we have a back channel going, not just in chat, but like we have like in one ear is the presenter hearing their own thing, and in the other ear is the mission control person saying like, okay, 30 seconds, 10 seconds, go. And that's very, very important, because like if you don't know when you're live, when you're going off, and like they're feeding you the questions from the Q&A so that you can just go and be professional and look good.
And as I mentioned, you know, like the time scale of things in the virtual versus the physical world is very different. Like, you know, you can sit and listen to a person talk for an hour and be focused and engaged because you're physically making eye contact with them in the room. But like the necessity of these much shorter presentations for their hybrid events and virtual events is because you just can't stay connected on, you know, a single topic for that long. So you have to constantly be changing things up in order to keep people engaged with different topics. And you can tell the story of like, you know, if you're a Java conference and you're telling about a specific technology, you just have to break it up with different speakers telling different pieces of that story so that the whole story is told over the course of the entire workshop or the day.
Michael, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I did. So that was from something you said earlier where
sorry.
like, no, it's great. Where you were saying like it is one additional thing, and it's like there's so many. It is daunting at times. I completely agree. The one thing that I have found to be kind of a saving grace is I run a monthly event as well as a yearly event. And so that gives the opportunity to iterate on a monthly basis and try things out. And that's been super helpful for me, at least, because I don't have to go all in, you know, like we got to figure out all the things we're going to do on this one event instead of, you know, I can try adding one thing at a time.
Yeah, and that iteration was extremely valuable. Like we wouldn't be giving this webinar today if we hadn't had the opportunity to iterate multiple days and try a whole bunch of different things to see what worked and what didn't. Otherwise, we'd just be telling you about, hey, we did, you know, a hybrid webinar and these things worked and these things didn't, rather than, you know, hey, now we know what actually does work.
And we definitely like we're not the end all be all of this. Like, and I mean, I'm getting ready to help out with DevVox UK, which is also going to be a hybrid event in the UK, which isn't like by then it's not going to be fully opened up. So, and a lot of like our submissions are down, even farther down than they expected, because a lot of people they're not sure if they're going to be able to travel, and they don't necessarily want to do a remote thing, and what does a remote deep dive look like? And so, I mean, there's so many people in very different situations around the world for running these events, and there are so many extra costs associated with all of this. So it's a lot of people like, and also the insurance that in a lot of places, I mean, because like when we did Antarcticonf, the only company that would insure us was the company that did Fire Festival.
That's not a
Because
joke either. That is
no,
true.
it's not, because it was in Antarctica and there's nobody that insures there. And even with that, like I could only get insurance for the 4 days of the conference, not the 19 days of the whole cruise. So I kept telling everyone, I was like, if anything happens to you, lie and tell them it was during these 4 days.
Is that because you would be liable outside of those days?
Well,
even,
no,
or-
but I mean, I was just like, I was like, just in case, because we are insured for like a whole lot of stuff during these 4 days. So if anything happens to you guys at all.
So I'm curious, so Matthew, I think I met you at Music City Tech. I think you and I were there together. That's a paid conference, but a cheaply paid conference, right? Across multiple days. How would you change that type of event now, given that we're a hybrid space? Because that's, so from my perspective, right? Like I deal with a lot of user groups that like Mikhail, right? That are monthly, but I also run the SQL Saturday stuff, right? So we're these free conferences that we're trying to run on $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, right? And now they have to be somewhat hybrid, So I'm just curious what you would do.
I think the first thing I would consider is the budgetary constraints and the expectations of the audience. So with something like Music City Code, where it's not a huge ticket price and the audience's expectations aren't super high. Like if you're doing a TED Talk kind of conference where like everyone has extremely high expectations and they paid a bunch of money to be there, you probably need the seamless event. You probably need to have double the staff doing everything so that there's no breaks. But at like Music City Code, if I were sitting there in the audience and someone had to, stop for a minute to get the online people set up, so before the presenter in the room started, it wouldn't bother me. It wouldn't be the end of the world. So I think just understanding what domain you're operating in is probably the first thing you have to do. See, is this even going to make sense to try doing this seamless? Or is it just like, yeah, we throw it together using commodity hardware from Best Buy to, put a camera on a table or something. It's good enough. So
would you shrink sessions? I'm curious that because Heather said you shrunk sessions. So would we go to speaker? You got 20 minutes, not an hour.
Yeah, for session time, I think I would, especially with the keynotes. I think there's this like, no more than 15 minutes, in my opinion, kind of attention span with a virtual audience. And so I would have more keynote speakers giving, talking about a diversity of topics or a topic that's across a single theme, just to keep changing it up for the keynotes and the plenary sessions and stuff like that. And then for the actual presentation sessions, you might just have to do it the same because, I don't know that you can condense an hour presentation down into 15 minutes, but you can clearly tell a story in 15 minutes for a keynote.
Josh, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think Steve may have just kind of hit on it. My question was not so much about individual speaker length. By the way, Heather, I was the horrible recipient of the way over on our Generals Don't Talk Over. That just one time that it happened. What's the ideal run length for the hybrid session? So there are some large conferences coming back, physical in person. And one of the big things that folks are trying to figure out is like, okay, do we just turn on the broadcast all day and you're sort of accessing, through a traditional set of rooms, or do we really tightly program a specific period of time and try and fit folks through that? If so, what's that like right amount of dwell time for someone in an online space? Is it 2 hours and at the end of 2 hours you're totally fatigued? Is it a whole day because you really care about the thing that you're at? What is it?
Well, I know that we definitely started to have people drop after 6 hours from online. I mean, the people in person even get tired at that time, but they also get a lunch break.
Right.
So, because online, like a lunch break doesn't really make sense because they can just go get food whenever they want. So like what we had to have that virtual MC, like making stuff up and having games and networking and things like that during
Right.
the time when people were going for lunch, or else we'd lose them because they'd never come back.
Right.
So I think like 4 to 5 hours of online content, or a 4 to 5 hour day without like a very long break, with just like 2 kind of shorter breaks,
Yep.
is good. And like just do it maybe in the middle of the day instead of starting really early and then ending really late.
Sure.
And that's and I know it's like a weird conference schedule that way, but then you could do like birds of a feather in the evening, that are exclusive content to people that are in person, and give people a reason to be there in person if they're there. Give something special extra that don't get recorded, and allow people to have that birds of a feather like open forum if they're in person.
Sure.
And another thing to think about for a lot of the tech conferences, you know, many of them that were multi-track conferences may just need to go down to a single track for like the next year or so if they're trying to do this hybrid event, or at least for the first time they're trying to do it. Number one, you don't need all the hardware in every room. Number two, you're probably going to have smaller audiences anyways. And then you can focus on essentially just perfecting this process in a single room with your crew all interacting. And then if it works well, consider expanding out to multi-track in subsequent years.
Yeah, we're actually thinking to do the same thing. We've got a group that wants to kind of reboot with a SQL Saturday, and they're really thinking to go like 11 to 3, one room. So people eat lunch beforehand, and so everybody's on an equal footing for a short period of time, to just to see how it works with one track, right? And partially cost, right?
Yeah, and then you don't have to worry about having multiple rooms with people recording in all the different rooms. You only need the one setup. Then it's more about making sure everybody's mic'd properly, so that the people online can hear the questions that are in the room and the conversation. I mean, and then it's just having the switchboard in the back so that you're not like hearing the conversations happening when they're not supposed to.
So when you were doing your hybrid, your last 3 events, were your speakers all physically present, or was it a blend thereof?
There were 3 people that weren't physically present, and the rest of them were all in person.
Observations from the physical room with the non-physical speaker?
Didn't mind.
Okay. I assumed as much.
But yeah, I don't think you'd want to
they-
do a whole day of that. Like if you intersperse that between live presenters, you can probably sustain it.
Yeah. There was only, and by the 3rd day of each of the workshops that we did, like, so there was actually, we experimented one time with, because we realized that like $75,000 for these events was obviously too much, not sustainable to keep doing these when they're normally 30,000. Like they're just not sustainable. So we're like, okay, well, can we have one person to handle 2 rooms or 3 rooms instead of having 1 per room? And the problem was like getting everybody signed on to each room. Like there's, in every single room, there's that 5 minutes where you get everybody set up right in the beginning. And if you don't have that person there, and these people aren't trained to do that themselves, then it was a problem. But by the 3rd day of that event, the people understood, like, okay, I just have to hit this button and I can get on. So you could lower your costs there by having somebody available for the first day and train everybody in the rooms. Like, okay, whenever you come into the room, hit this button and you can sign on. and then you only need them for the first day.
It definitely requires prepping the attendees so that they know what to expect when they go into a breakout room and nobody's in there. You have to stagger introductions. So they introduce themselves while your person's going to this room, getting it set up. And then that person comes in this room while they do introductions and they're getting set up. And then You can make it work, but it's definitely not like super easy.
Yeah, but so if you had a virtual speaker in that room and there wasn't an attendant there,
Yeah.
then you're totally screwed. Yeah.
Cool.
So
Well, do we want to keep going with this, or are we pretty much wrapped up now?
if there's the only other thing that I saw that popped up was Deborah had asked about the captions, because like obviously like one of the things that we do that I don't see very often in the smaller events that they do in the bigger events is have the we have captions available for most of our events. We do and that's easier to do when you're doing a virtual event. Like we for our UN events, and we always have interpretation in person. Like we'll have a live interpreter, obviously because it's the UN. But if we're broadcasting anyway, if we're streaming to something, then I can always do an RTMP feed to a service that will do live captioning, and that goes to an app that people can just show on their phone. So and that will do not just captioning in English, but it'll do multilingual translation. So if you're doing a hybrid event, or if you're just live videoing it anyway, then you can do an RTMP stream immediately and caption that. So no matter what your event is, that's something that you can add as an accessibility feature.
And which, if you're getting like smaller local attendee turnouts, that can potentially increase your audience to a more international attendees.
Or
as
even
well.
just at, like you can say, like we now have the ability to like we now have accessibility options that we didn't have before, because it'll do like even just having subtitles for your talks for every one of them gives you that option, and you can do that for any talk.
And it works pretty
Use
well.
PowerPoint.
Yeah, it works pretty
Yeah,
well.
you
It's
can
not
use
perfect.
PowerPoint, but not everybody is on Windows, and it doesn't work as well on Mac. So
You're doing automated captions. Did I miss that? Or-
yeah, automated captions, and it does automated translation and automated text to speech.
But
And
for-
which technology was this? I'm sorry.
It's called Wordly.
Okay.
It costs about $125 an hour for translation. So it does it in 16 languages. So
Okay.
like that, it is a trivial cost for translation for a conference.
But just to clarify, for the United Nations, they use manual translators. Like they actually.
Well, actually now they're switching over to
Oh, gotcha.
this, because like normally they would have 5 different live interpreters, and each of them costs $3,500 a day. And for this, it's $750 a day for 16 languages. So for the last event I did, I showed them that they had 112 people for their 5-hour event listening to 16 languages. So 112 times 16 times 5 for $750.
And that is why she's the CTO. Cool. Well, if that answers everyone's questions, I think we'll wrap things up here. If you guys did find this valuable, just be sure to let us know. And if you're interested in doing more of these kind of knowledge sharing across the tech community leaders things, either webinars or, like I said, we really want to get everybody here in Las Vegas sometime just to hang out, share ideas, build a network, and help everyone, help each other. So cool. All right. Well, thank you very much. And everyone have a great day.